I'm Bronwyn Williams. We're back with a small print, and today our guest is Germinal G. Van. Germinal, as you were warned before you came on the show, like 10 seconds ago, on this show, we ask our guests to introduce themselves the way they'd like to be introduced. So, who are you? Where are you in the world? And what do you do? What are you interested in?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me on the platform. It's a true honor. So my name is Germinal Gerard Van, and I was born and raised in Ivory Coast. French is my first language, as you could pick on my accent. I've been living in the United States for the past 13 years now. I studied political science at the Catholic University of America, and then I studied political management at George Washington University for my master's. And today I run a publishing company. I'm the owner. I run a publishing company, and I am also the owner and run a online newspaper called the Lake Street Review. So that's what I do. It's a lot of work, but I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship. So yeah.
So, tell us a bit about what you publish, because you've written and authored a number of books yourself, but do you publish other people's works too? Tell me about your publishing house.
Yeah, sure. So yes, I did write about 26 books total. And I write on politics and economics, specifically economics, more economics than politics. And I do publish other people. My company has actually 4 authors that it published. So there is a fifth author that we are currently working with. So and we basically focus on nonfiction and academic work. So anything that deals with economics, politics, and history. So that's what my company does, pretty much.
Okay, and do you have like a thesis for yourself, for your work that you put out on the various social platforms that you active on and through your publishing house? What are the sort of messages that you're hoping to get out?
Yeah, so my thesis, so I usually write about capitalism and wealth inequality. And the reason why I'm really passionate about this topic is because I think capitalism is misunderstood. And I think specifically people confuse unequal with unfair. So that's why I've devoted myself to write about wealth inequality, to make people understand what actually engineers wealth inequality and how it can be curbed. Because I think every problem there is a solution, but they're used as trade-off, right? So of course, the issue of wealth inequality is something that cannot be resolved because everyone cannot be rich at the same time. So there will always be inequality. But the main point is to reduce that gap between the well-to-do and the poor. So that's why I'm writing a lot about wealth inequality, and so that I want people to understand that the system in which we live in, which is the market economy, which is capitalism, in fact, is a system that enables everybody to actually transfer or to migrate from one social class to another, specifically migrating upward.
And I think you're welcome to talk about that topic. I've certainly followed you on Instagram, of all places, for quite a long time. So I'm quite familiar with your basic thesis, but I thought it was worthwhile getting your own words out to listeners who may be not familiar with yourself. But I think you have a particularly credible vantage point with which to talk about subjects, being an African immigrant to the United States, the sort of bastion of capitalism. And clearly you moved in that direction for a reason. So if you don't mind being slightly personal, can you tell us a bit about your background as to why you ended up moving from Ivory Coast to the US and how you found yourself in the world that you are now?
Yeah, this is a great question. So it's quite interesting. I was never immersed in the Francophone or French culture. It was never my thing. For some reason, I always loved the United States. I always loved Anglo-Saxon culture. So even if I didn't end up necessarily in the US, I would have probably been in England or live in an English-speaking country. And the reason why is because in English-speaking countries, they have a entrepreneurial mentality. It's about self-reliance. It's English people are merchants. That's what it is, compared to French people who are more bureaucratic, right? So in England, for example, because they're merchants, so they created a system in which anybody can buy and sell, can pretty much sell goods and services. And this is that culture that they transfer in the United States, because the United States was conquered by England. So the United States is also a country of merchants. And I was always attracted to that, to be able to get into the free enterprise and do whatever you have to do in order to not just survive, but to make ends meet and to even improve your lifestyle. And I remember I told my mom when I was like 10 years old, I told her one day, I said, one day I will go to the United States. One day I will live in the US, because back then I was just 10. I didn't know about the American dream and all the intricacies of the American dream, but my guts were telling me that that's the place to go to make it, because it's the only country where you see a ton of billionaires. I mean, South Africa has billionaires too, don't get me wrong. You have people like Patrice Motsepe, who I admire a lot. But the United States is a country where you can literally leave everything you have behind and come here and make it. There is no social ceiling compared to Europe. In Europe, they have a social ceiling. That's why, for example, when you look at Africans who live in Europe, the only Africans who are wealthy or rich are athletes or maybe singers. You don't see Africans who are business owners and who are like extremely wealthy, like the way you will see in the United States. Because in Europe, they don't inculcate the spirit of entrepreneurship and capitalism. Europe is very it's a big social democracy bloc, right? People highly believe in government there, so they don't push the narrative for entrepreneurship. Whereas in the United States, yes, people also want government, but it's less intense as it is in Europe. So in the United States, you know that you have a better shot to make it in life than if you were going in Europe. So that's pretty much what attracted me.
Okay, and how long have you been in the US for now?
13 years.
13 years, that's a long time. I wanted to ask you a question. Do you think in the time that you've been there, America has become more American in the ways that you've been speaking about, or less so? And the reason I say that is I couldn't help but noticing a tweet by Joe Biden on X now, no longer Twitter, that he put out yesterday saying, "Let me be clear to any corporation that hasn't brought their prices back down, even as inflation has come down, it's time to stop the price gouging," which is clearly like empirically wrong. I mean, obviously the whole internet community decided to criticize the empirical wrongness of this. But what I thought was interesting is that it was a very anti-capitalist, anti-flourishing comments to come from the leader of the free world, free in terms of both liberty and in terms of financial liberty, right? So I'm interested to get your thoughts as to what's going on in America these days, and why are these sorts of obviously ridiculous sentiments gaining hold?
Well, this is because wealth inequality has grown significantly in America. So people grow frustrated. And when they see the gap between the rich and the poor growing, they can't help themselves but blaming the system for leaving them behind. And it's true, there is a system, but the question is, do you understand how the system works, right? Because the capitalist system is a very simple system. It's a dynamic system. Let me explain what I mean. In capitalism, if you want to be among the wealthy, you have to own assets. It's not about your labor. It's not the labor theory of value, right? You can put as much work as you want, it won't make you rich. It's the asset you own that makes you rich. If labor made people rich, then construction workers would be billionaires, right? But they're not. It's people like Warren Buffett who are billionaires. Although Warren Buffett never laid a brick in his entire life. So in capitalism, you own assets. And when you own assets, you have equity because it's a piece of the economy that you own. That's why in a capitalist system, producers are richer than consumers, because producers, who are also consumers, sell a good or a service that helps them generate profit, while they also help the consumer maximizing its utility. That's how capitalism works. And producers produce more than they consume. So the difference is what they invest in capital assets. That's how you build wealth in a capitalist society. The talking point of Joe Biden is purely political. Joe Biden himself is a millionaire. He's a millionaire. Yes, he's worth close to $15 million. How did he make that money? Right? He was a senator his whole life. A senator in the United States doesn't make more than $174,000 a year. The highest politician paid in the United States is a president, $400,000 a year. But the guy is worth 15 million. How? There's a big gap between 400,000 and 15 million. How did you get those 15 million, right? So if it wasn't for the capitalist system that enabled him to be where he's at, he wouldn't be saying the things he says today. The thing he says today is just pure political talking points, because he's on the line again. He's running for a second term. I personally don't think he will make it to the second term, but that's just my personal opinion. But he's running for a second term, and he needs people who resent capitalism to vote for him, because the Democratic Party is a left-wing party. It still remains pretty right-wing compared to like left-wing parties in Europe and Africa. But in the United States, the political spectrum of the United States, the Democratic Party remains a left-wing party, and the left, at the end of the day, stays on the same ideas: solidarity, more government, progressive policies, tax the rich, and so on and so forth. So that's the political talking points that Joe Biden is doing. The tweety put is just politics. I personally think that Joe Biden doesn't believe the things he says. I really don't believe he means it. Joe Biden is not an ideological person. When he was a senator, he used to be known for a great compromiser. Like, he used to compromise a lot. He would always find the middle ground. So someone who tries to find the middle ground is not an ideological person, because someone who believes in ideology will always refuse to compromise, right? But he's always trying to bring people together and, okay, guys, let's find a common ground and then work on it. He was the king of bipartisanship, if we can put it that way. So most of the things Joe Biden says is just for politics.
But what about the things that Joe Biden has done? That was another thing I wanted to ask you today. Again, as someone who's lived on the African continent and lived in the US, and I know you've written about it in your work too, the sheer amount of excess money in the system, because this is, of course, the Achilles heel of capitalism. Capitalism works as long as the game everyone is playing is fair. Then it's actually quite a fun game to play, right? Because we can all make the things we want to make and buy the things we want to buy, and everyone has a chance to get ahead. But that game is not so fun to play when it becomes a monopoly game, right? Where someone gets to play by different rules to everyone else. And in the US, there's sort of a double layer to the onion there, in that, of course, when you gerrymandering around with the likes of modern monetary theory or quantitative easing, you are effectively, what you're doing is picking winners and losers. You're sort of playing God with the lives of men. You're choosing who gets an advantage, who doesn't, who gets handicaps, and who gets penalties, and who gets to get ahead. But you're doing that among your own people. But because the global economy is not a Robinson Crusoe economy, the global economy is fluid, and money is fungible, and it flows beyond borders. The domestic policy choices that America or Joe Biden makes in order to win political favor. As you say, he's a politician with his electorate and with other electorates too. I mean, I don't think there were many Americans that were unhappy with getting, extra checks in the mail during COVID. I mean, like, there's a few people that understood what the cost would be, but not many were unhappy. It was a very wise political move to get people onto your side, but it still has political and economic effects for non-voters, people in the countries that you come from or I come from. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, right? On not the things Joe Biden said, but the things that he has done and how that has made the capitalist game less fun and less fair to play.
Sure. So wealth inequality in capitalism is engineered by government policy, specifically fiscal and monetary policy. So what you described specifically with COVID and the stimulus check and everything. So basically government prints money, right? So that money being printed and injected in the economy create what we call the Cantillon effect. So the Cantillon effect is a theory developed by French economist Richard Cantillon, who argued that when government injects money in the economy, it basically creates three types of recipients. And the first recipients are the upper class, the ultra wealthy. So when that money comes in the economy, they get that money first. So the banks, the financial institutions, the government, the ultra wealthy people, when they get that money, the price of goods and assets has not increased yet, right? And then the merchant class, so the entrepreneurial class, I love to call them merchant because entrepreneurs are merchant. They sell goods and services. The merchant class, what's it?
I call them the codependent class, but the same thing, the trading class, yeah.
Yeah, the trading class, yes. So the merchant class is basically now receiving that money too, which now enables business owners to get interest rates, to get loans at lower interest rates, and to expand the business and to expand their business operations. And by the time the working class and the poor gets that money, the price of goods and assets have already skyrocketed. So now when they go to the store to buy essentials, for example, let's say they want, like, someone goes and buy a box of toothpaste. Let's say last year the box of toothpaste cost $4. And then this year he goes and he saw that the thing cost $6. So there's an increase of $2, right? What has happened is the Cantillon effect. So the price has increased, but the value of the toothpaste hasn't increased. Like, there was nothing that the company made that increased the value of the toothpaste. The toothpaste is still the same thing, but the price has increased. But compared to someone who owns stocks, let's say you own Apple shares, right? Let's say you own a couple of them, and one share of Apple costs $150. And then when the government injects that money, the price of the Apple stock goes up now. So the share goes all the way to $200 a share. So you see that you got wealthy, but did Apple innovate? Not necessarily. They didn't create a product or service. Maybe Apple's not a good example. Let's say Microsoft, because Apple always release a new phone with new features, it can then increase the value of the company. But let's say Microsoft, who I believe didn't innovate for a long time now. So, right, so we use the same example. So you see that now your shares of Microsoft increased to $200, but Microsoft hasn't innovated, right? So there's no value. So the intrinsic value of Microsoft hasn't gone up, but its stock price went up because the value of a stock price is based on a supply and demand, especially in the short term. In the long term, it must be correlated with the intrinsic value of the company. So you see that the Cantillon effect benefits the rich, and it's government who does that because only government has the power to print money. The private sector doesn't have the power to print money. It doesn't. Only government has that power, and when government exercise that power, it basically decrease the purchasing power because new money reduce the value of existing money. That's why. And that's what the Federal Reserve did in 2021 with those stimulus checks. And the government borrowed a lot of money for Joe Biden's programs, right? So the more money government borrows, it increases interest rates for everyone, whether it's for the public and the private sector. And every sector of the economy now has high interest rates. So it makes the cost of borrowing much more expensive. So technically, it was the Federal Reserve and Joe Biden's policies that actually triggered inflation. The inflationary situation that we have today was engineered by government. It's not because of corporate greed. Only government can create inflation because government has the power to create money, and money is not wealth.
Exactly. But the challenge here with talking to people who see the effects of policies and don't necessarily understand the mechanics behind it, because a lot of this stuff is hidden and it's designed to be hidden. Like the way the monetary system works is designed to be as obscure as possible. Like I've got a master's degree in economics and I still struggle to explain how, you create money, right? Like you sell it to the bank and this is why there's a credit on this ledger, and it's designed to be obtuse. It's designed to be complicated and difficult and hidden. But I find that it's generally helpful to just separate the problem into its parts, which is the fact that there is a massive difference between the goods economy, which is generally good. That's where we get real scarcity and real stuff. And that's where capitalism is a fun game to play because we're all making and swapping and trading things. And then there's the non-profit side of the economy, which can often be very bad because it's almost invisible. And we see it being like the air, or we call it things like the economy because we tend to conflict ideas quite a lot. But as soon as you separate the two and you say, is this a real problem or is this a nominal problem? Is this about real stuff or is this about changing and fiddling the rules, which is already is. And that's sort of the point of money. Like money should have hard rules, whereas the goods economy should have no rules. But when you see things like prices going up, the natural impulse of someone who's trying to fill a trolley and trying to feed their children with what seems to be less and less at the end of every month, because obviously salaries and incomes are much stickier than the prices of goods in stores, that person is quite inclined to say, government, please help, stop the corporate's price gouging and fix the prices, right? Because
and that's a mistake.
The world, the real person sitting in that real store feels it's the price of things that is the problem. So just change that and we'll solve it. Because you don't understand how these two layers are entirely different. You can't solve a nominal problem with like real solutions, and you can't solve real problems with nominal solutions. They lie in two entirely different planes. But how do you attempt to sort of explain these things? Because I do admire the way you do explain very complicated subjects in very simple terms, and you're definitely a resource that I point people to if they, along with, of course, economics in one lesson, the good old Henry. That's the place to start to try and get your head around. Just demystifying the very deliberate mystery that is the economy.
It's important for people to understand that wealth in a nation is determined by the amount of goods and services being produced. It's not money. You can give $1 trillion to every single person. It doesn't mean they're rich. Because the money you have in the bank account is not wealth. It's part of what constitutes wealth. Wealth is the constant production of goods and services. And I said, in order to build wealth in a capitalist system, you have to produce more than you consume. If you consume all the time, what happens? You get into debt. Debt works for government because government loves deficits. I run a business. Actually, I run 2 businesses. And
they don't have to pay back the money ever. You do.
Right. Exactly. We have to pay back that money. They don't. And the thing is, and the thing to understand is that when you run a business, you cannot be unprofitable forever. Meaning that at some point, because not surplus, but profit. Profit is what shows the health of your business. If you run a business that is not profitable, then at first it can be good for expansion. That's what most tech companies do, and then they hope to make it the stock market to recover, right? Once they make it, or to get acquired. But if you get unprofitable for a very long time, you will have to eventually file for bankruptcy. So technically, you have to turn a profit at some point. But government, they don't turn a profit. In fact, it's against their interest to turn a profit. Because if government turn a profit, in political terms, we call it surplus, then that means that they're not able to spend on what they think is for the common good. And who is to blame for that? It's actually us, the people, because we're the one who tells government, we want the schools, we want the roads, we want the infrastructure, we want this, we want that. But what people don't understand is where government get those resources to give you those goods. Because when government decide to create a school or to create a social program, where government takes that money, if government decide to take that money through revenue, so AKA through taxes, that means that government is simply using existing income. It takes it from investors and savers to transfer it to consumers and spenders and borrowers, right? So it's existing income being transferred. But the issue with the reason why government can't use taxes, especially not for a long time, is because if it keeps using taxes, it will disincentivize people to work. Because for how much and for how long are you going to keep taxing people just for you to be able to do whatever school, to create whatever school you want or whatever program you want? So people will be disincentivized. So government goes and borrow money. And because it borrows money, now it depreciates our purchasing power, which leads to inflation, because the more money is in the economy, the less purchasing power we have, and therefore our purchasing power decrease and the price of goods and services inflate. I've always said the best way to keep government in check is to have a commodity-backed economy, because a commodity-backed economy, aka the gold standard, the silver standard, whatever tangible asset you want to back money, keeps government in check. Government cannot spend as much as it wants. And this is why Nixon took government of the United States off the gold standard, so that government now will have free hands to spend on whatever it wants. The sole goal of government is to enlarge its electoral base. The more government spends on programs and goods and services for people, the more it increases its electoral base, because people now will want to vote for them. So government is not concerned by the profit motive, or should I say, the profit motive of government is votes. So that's what it is. Now, like, my advice for people in the capitalist system who want to get ahead, the system is the system. The system will not change. But what you can do is for you to become a merchant, an entrepreneur, a producer. If you move to the producing class, you will inevitably become wealthy. But it takes time, and you need to produce more than you consume. Because you can be a producer, but if your income increase and you suddenly increase your lifestyle to match your income, then nothing has happened. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Because you're still netting at zero. You want to have a difference. It's that difference when you have more income than and less spending or less expenses. That difference, what we call profit, is what you invest in capital assets, and those assets you invest in make money for you. That's how capitalism works.
Yeah,
I understood that.
That's how it should work. That's how it should work if it's working freely and fairly. I do want to go back to your earlier point around, like, the US coming off the gold standard, and how economies that are backed on commodities or hard assets can be, they put greater checks and balances on governments. It could be argued that the US currency at the moment is kind of backed on a real asset, or at least the belief in a real asset, much like the dollar was backed on gold. But if anyone had actually called in that gold claim, there would have been losses. There's quite a lot of evidence to show that the government's running on the gold standard didn't really have the gold to back up their claims. It was, like, in theory, backed on gold, but who's checking the checkers, right? Who's watching the watches? And it was backed not so much on gold as on people's belief that there was gold in the vault, right? And there's kind of an argument to be made that the current value of the US dollar is backed, at least in principle, again, by the military mights of the US, by the fact that if anyone disagrees or anyone challenges claims to capital or claims to wealth, there are ways to enforce belief. So I always say, like any currency, whether it's a cryptocurrency or a real currency, is backed up by, in part by faith, that people believe it has value, and in part by enforcement, which is literal force. But the interesting thing about the US dollar being in the back of our minds, and the sort of the lizard brain part of our minds, that's sort of subconscious, that the dollar has value because America has might, right? But that's quite interesting now, because I've been reading up lately on how America's reserves in terms of warheads, in terms of war preparations, is now less than what people think it is. At the same time, you've got countries like China, whose military actual hard reserves, which can almost be seen as an alternative to gold, because it's still a hard, real constraint, are greater than what people think. So there's a sort of a perception difference between the perceived and the real weight of a currency, right, in the global market space. I don't know if you have a thought on that, but it's interesting to think that the reason America can get away with printing records amounts of money that would just absolutely decimate any economy from Argentina to Zimbabwe who dared to try it anywhere else, because we don't have that perceived value. Because if we did say, like, go take your toilet paper and flush it down the loo, whereas America does it, and the dollar's still worth more than a rand, right? And there's nothing we can do about it, because it is backed by hardness, but the threat, or at least the credible threat, of violence or force. But what happens when that cash is checked, much like with the bank run in the older sort of the pre-gold standard economy, if a client or a client nation or a debtor came and said, give me my gold for my credit, and they were unable to do so, that would have caused a bank run and a loss of faith in the currency, which is part of the reason why Nixon did it, because they were quite scared they wouldn't be able to make good on those claims. So just let's deal with that preemptively. There's also this kind of interesting thing in terms of geopolitics and economics at the moment, that if someone comes and checks America's balance in terms of force or credible value to back up the currency there, they might be left wanting. And there are sort of theories that what's going on with Ukraine and even with Gaza to a certain extent could be seen as tests to see if America does have the goods to back up its claims. And there's a very big reason why the rest of the world would want to do that, because if the rest of the world finds out that America doesn't have the weight behind its currency as they claim to, then what America's been doing, quite frankly, since 2021 is stealing from the rest of the world, right? Because that cancillion effect does not remain within the domestic US borders. It also affects the rest of the world. In fact, worse, right? Because we're much further away from the first drink at the tap here, right? So there's kind of an incentive for people to check this. I don't know what your theories are there on the credible threat of force being what's currently holding the sort of the global economy in place in very much the same way gold was prior, and what happens when that sort of someone asks to look under the hood.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more about what you explained. It's like the reason why the dollar remains such a strong currency, despite the fact that there is no tangible asset to back it, is because we trust the US government. We trust the might of the military power of the US government, right? We're like, the US is the most powerful country in the world. If the government claims that they're going to pay back their debts, their obligations or whatever, they're going to do it. Because at the end of the day, the US is the largest debtor, right? And they still, and at the same time, they're the first power in the world. So it shows to people that the United States is using its debt well, because while they keep piling up their debt, because the national debt in the United States is $33 trillion, which is like more than the GDP of the US economy. So that tells you that we are definitely over leveraged. But because we are the largest debtor and we are at the same time the most powerful country in the world, so we got away with it. But imagine a country like Zimbabwe, right? Sorry, not to cut you off. But imagine a country like Zimbabwe, right, where it takes a lot of debt, but its economic growth and development doesn't follow up.
Yeah. If you take on debt, you have to grow even faster. You have to grow faster than your interest rate premiums. So that's why our current like debt-based global economy has been compared to a treadmill. Like we can't stop growing. You can't have degrowth, whatever Europe wants, or the climate activists would be interested in. You can't have degrowth as long as you're funding the world on debt. You have to grow. You have to grow at a faster rate than your debt. Debt grows. Debt is not a stationary thing. Debt is tied to interest. So your economy grow at a higher level than whatever interest you're paying.
And the thing is, the thing I want to add is that it's the problem is that it's unsustainable.
Yeah,
that's the issue. It's unsustainable because and that right and that's the thing that when people use Keynesian economics to justify why like government should intervene and we use that, and I was like, okay, Keynes was not able to provide a rational, logical, intellectual argument to justify his policies in the long term. In the short term, no problem. We understand why Keynes.
That will kick the can, and then it won't be somebody else's problem. That was his whole
exactly.
And that's a very attractive theory, especially to politicians, because it's not even in the long run. It's in the next 4 years. It's going to be someone else's baby. So drink and be merry, right? There's absolutely no incentive to shut down the party. It's just an incentive to make sure you leave the party before the cleaners come in,
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, no, you nailed it. And that's the thing with Keynes. He said, oh, in the long run we're all dead. No. Maybe us will be dead, but there are the future generations coming.
We're living in the world of his consequences. Yes,
right. And all these policies we're implementing now, they have consequences on the future generations. Like the cost of living is going to go up for them, because think about this.
There's also prison. So the way I explain it again is there's no such thing as free cake, but the cake is paid for by someone, somewhen.
Yep,
and somewhere.
Exactly.
That can could be kicked across time or across space or across both of it. Like there's also living people that will pay for it, that will never get to taste the cake, but will still get to
exactly. Because like for example, a Harvard education before 1971 was $2,000 a year. Today, you go to Harvard, you pay close to $80,000 a year. So imagine people who have kids in 2023. Those kids, when they will turn 18, that will be what, in 2040, something like that. How much how much college tuition will cost then? Right? But why college tuition it keeps increasing? Because of student debt loans, and student debt loans is now controlled 92% by the US government. So the government created a monopoly over student debt loans, making the cost of tuition far more expensive, because universities say, well, we're going to keep increasing the price of tuition, the cost of tuition, because you can get a loan with the government. Why should we care about it? Right? And that's Keynesian economics. Oh, in the long run, we're all dead. No, but there are people behind us who are coming too, and they're going to incur the cost of those things, which is not fair.
But as you said, in the short run, there's not much you can do about the system or about the nominal side of the economy, which, quite frankly, that's an external factor that you have to deal with. But there are the other things you can deal with, and that is in the goods economy, in the real economy. You can make stuff and you can add value, which is the, like what you're saying, you create a surplus, you produce more than you consume. It's another way to say that you add value to society rather than subtract it, because what you produce doesn't have to thing. It could be a publication like you do, it could be any sort of form of labor, but you have to contribute.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And start small, right?
Always start small and then get bigger.
Well, that's all the questions I have for you. If you want to make any other points clear, by all means, I'm going to give you the last word here, but also want to give you space to tell people where they can find you, where they can engage conversation, and where they can read your books.
Sure.
Working on.
So I am very active on social media, specifically Instagram. So everyone can find me on Instagram. My Instagram is Germinal G Van, all one word. They can find my books on Amazon, also on the website of my publishing company, which is ggvpublishingcompany@gmail.com. ggvpublishingcompany.com. And then at gmail.com, that's the email address. Sorry.
We'll put all the links in there.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, people can find me there. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn too. That's why I post the articles of the lecture review. Facebook, it's more personal. And I'm also on X, Twitter. I don't like the word X. I prefer Twitter. I don't know why Elon called it X, but even Elon is one of my favorite entrepreneurs. So yeah, I'm on Twitter as well. So yeah, I'm pretty much everywhere. So you guys can basically anything that deals with social media, I'm there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure it's much earlier in the day than it is here. But good luck the rest of the year. Good luck producing.
Thank you. Oh, I will keep producing. We have to. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's right, I'm wearing red. I did that very deliberately to try and capture your attention instead of my usual black. I did that because I've got quite important and very exciting, for me at least, announcement. And that is that our new book, Rescuing Our Republic, which has been written in conjunction with my friends and colleagues at Discourse ZA, is now out and about in bookstores across South Africa and available online for anyone else that is curious about South Africa. And as I've said before, as a futurist and a trained analyst and economist, I do think that South Africa is one of the clearest bellwethers as to where the weird Western world is headed. And as such, there's something you can learn from us at the bottom of Africa. We're ahead of quite a few of the trends that you're just wrapping your heads around. Anyway, this book is based on some of our most popular and most revealing, interesting and important conversations that we've had over the last couple of years at Discourse ZA, which is a YouTube channel you should absolutely subscribe to. It's also available as a podcast if you're interested in anything to do with politics, philosophy and economics. But the conversations in this particular book are focused on, as the title says, rescuing our republic, or more specifically, what civil society and individuals should be thinking about and doing and starting if they are interested in investing in a future for South Africa that we actually want to be a part of. Anyway, I would love for you to read this book and to give it to someone either that you like or that you hate, because the purpose of this book is to kickstart conversations around big, interesting, ugly even, but important ideas that are worthy of debate. So if you're planning on being bored or understimulated at a family or friend event this festive season, this is the book you need to give you the conversation starters to start a debate or a fight with those who you love or love to hate most.